Today on the Run the Riot podcast, we've got Alex Larson. How's it going, Alex?
Oh, it's so great. I'm so excited to be here today and chat.
Yeah, glad to have you. Like we said off air, you and I tried to get together for the podcast a while back, and we couldn't connect. Busy lives, and I've got kids running around. It sounds like you've got kids running around.
Yes. This is like my mom time to do something for mom and just have the kids off with their dad doing something else.
So pray for dad. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so, I have, lots of fun questions to ask, lots of things. I get asked a lot as an ultra running coach and, about nutrition and everything. And, sometimes we have the answers, sometimes we don't. And so, let's start off with a little bit of your background. Who are you?
Yeah. Well, so my background is I'm a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian since 2010. So it's been a while. And when I started out as a baby dietitian, I had no aspirations to be in like sports nutrition whatsoever. I thought I was going to end up working in a hospital because that's what my parents did. But I ended up kind of going the non-traditional route with being a dietitian. And while I was starting my career, I also really got into just triathlon and just being really active and swimming, running, biking. And as I kind of progressed as an athlete, and I'm like a pretty mediocre athlete. Like I'm not an all-star, like super fast and like excel, in particular, but I just really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the social aspect of it. And so then next thing I know, I'm signing up for Ironman Wisconsin in 2014, or well, I guess 2013 for 2014 for the race. And big undertaking, huge amount of like planning and training and nutrition that goes into that. And then I remember very vividly on the day of the race when I crossed the finish line thinking, oh my gosh, if I didn't know what I was doing with my nutrition, like this day could have gone south really quickly. And that was where I started, that kind of started the whole thing where I started to feel like, oh, I think this is my calling. I think I need to help my people. Like the farther that they want to go, the more I'm like, heck yeah, let's like fuel you for that kind of fun, long distance, all day event kind of thing. And so I started Alex Larson Nutrition down the road after becoming a mom and starting a family. And it was always my dream to, have this business where I'm doing what I'm passionate about and then have the flexibility of being a mom as well. So that's what kind of started the whole thing. And so now, for the past I'd say 4 years. Well, I guess 2021 is when I went full-time in my business. And so we work with triathletes, runners, ultra runners, cyclists. And I have a team now of dietitians and we absolutely love our job. We're obsessed with it. Like we feel like this is, for my team and I, like this is the best. This is the best of how it gets in our career as a dietitian.
Oh man. I love that when you can piece those things together. And, since I started coaching a few years back, you're doing the same thing. You're helping people achieve their goals, push further and do something they couldn't do before, and you're helping with that piece of it. And, that's cool. That's so fulfilling.
Yeah. And I'll say like my favorite type of athlete to work with are the, like, not the pro athletes, like the athletes that just like, this is their passion. This is what they love to do. They work full time. They've got families. They're trying to navigate it all. Like those are my people. Cause that's what I'm like trying to figure out myself is like, I just had a baby 5 months ago and now I'm like, okay, I got to get back into running and find that mom time to get away and just do something for myself and feel good and feel fit. Like I get it. So like, those are personally my favorite people to work with.
Oh, I love that. I relate 100%. Just I'm a dad. I'm a husband, a dad, and have to juggle all the things, and train. So it's fun. It's fun to, if I can navigate it, other people can too. And so
Absolutely.
That relatability is there. I looked at your website, and I think so. For everybody listening, I discovered you on TikTok. I guess when you go on TikTok, the algorithms put you with, other endurance athletes and stuff. And I go check out our TikTok. I'll put it in the show notes. It's pretty funny the things that you put on there. I guess.
Yeah, I will fully admit, I don't spend as much time on TikTok anymore as I used to because I found myself spending way too much time scrolling. Whereas I spend probably I stay a little more current on Instagram, just because I have a little more self-control there. But yeah, TikTok, I was like, oh my God, I get sucked into this app so much. And so I had to like remove it from my phone screen.
That's
But I
funny.
do sometimes go back on TikTok and I'll upload some new videos. But yeah,
But
I like social media is totally my jam. I like to make nutrition fun and
yeah.
funny, and especially because there's really some funny things about endurance athletes and nutrition that just crack me up.
Yeah, and that's what that's what drew me to it, because it was funny. You were taking, all the things we struggle with and the things we joke about in the extremes, and you were just making jokes about it, and I thought it was good. It was
Yeah,
fun.
pooping in the woods is
Yes.
definitely like always a hit. Like,
Yeah.
that bean burrito you had the night before and then head out on the trails, like it's not going to go over so well. So yeah, I those are my favorite to make because they're just fun.
Yeah. Well, and people relate to it. And we all have the issues,
We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into, you've been doing this, and what's funny is, what I like to ask when I'm talking to people who, when I'm hearing their story, when they've done their first ultra marathon or first, whatever long distance event. For you, it would be your first Ironman. And what I heard, it sounds like you nailed your nutrition, or pretty close to it, or you were satisfied with how well your nutrition played out for your first Ironman.
I was. And, back in 2014, with what we knew about endurance nutrition, it was pretty adequate. But then now where we're at, 10 years later, I look back on it and I'm like, oh crap, I was underfueled. Like there's actually a lot more fueling that I could have done. And I'm like, dang it, like I now kind of want to sign up for another Ironman here and like do this, even better. And that's like the evolution of nutrition though. Like we're always learning, we're always finding like better ways to fuel. And I do feel like we're starting to pull ourselves out of that like diet culture mentality more. And we're starting to say like, no, let's really like embrace carbs, or like really fuel more and not be afraid of the sugar. And we're seeing, athletes really flourish in those longer distances now. We're seeing bigger PRs. And I think that's very fun from my aspect, because you feel better too. You know what I mean? Like your training runs are more enjoyable as well, because you're supplying your body with what it needs.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to confess, because I've been dealing with some sinus stuff this morning. So I went on a run and I ran 2 hours and I brought 0 water, 0 electrolytes, and 0 fuel.
Oh no.
So I thought it was hilarious. I was thinking through this podcast and I was like, I just totally, and I would coach my runners not to do that, but I just,
right.
but we do things. But you were talking about the evolution of how things have changed, and I might be misquoting it, and I don't know if you heard, but one of the world-class marathoners is consuming like 120 grams of carbs per hour.
Yes.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. Yes. That's what's really interesting about what we're seeing with athletes fueling now. So, I mean, the typical recommendation, I've got all these textbooks behind me in my office here. It's like 60 to 90 grams of carb an hour is typically like the sweet spot, right? And also coming from like multiple sources of like different sugar, like that glucose fructose ratio. Like a 2 to 1, like there's some that say like 1 to 0.8, something like that. That really is the like best like rate of absorbability in the body. But we're starting to see like athletes being able to train their gut to take in way beyond that 90 grams. And so, this 120 is coming out with a bigger trend with some of the higher level athletes who are just like a machine in terms of like their gut handles it really well. They're taking in that fuel and using it to just power through and see like really great performances. So the cyclists, I've seen that trend definitely going up with the 120 grams per hour, and then the ultra runners too, because with like ultra runners, you're not going like full out all the time, so your heart rate's a little bit lower. Your gut's going to be moving a little bit better than if you're like a really high VO2 max like effort. So you can tolerate higher levels. And with ultra Ultra runners, I love you guys because you guys can tolerate all sorts of different foods. I mean,
Yeah.
at any point, like you're like, any calorie is a good calorie with you guys because you'll be out there eating. I had one ultra runner that would send me, he'd send me selfies during his race of him eating like pizza out on the trails, and I'm like, you're the best. That just warms my heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I love that we're pushing the envelope with, you know, a higher rate of carbs an hour. I think as long as your gut tolerates it, I say go for it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's one of those things where I guess I'll let you speak to the importance of training your gut, because if somebody just goes out right now and they're not used to it, and I'm going to consume, I got a 3-hour run, I'm going to do 120 carbs per hour, I think they might end up in the bathroom or something quite a bit.
Yeah, they're not going to be feeling too good, and that's one of the issues. Is like if you take an athlete that, you know, maybe they're used to only taking like 40-50 grams of carb an hour, and then they hear like that so-and-so that does really well takes this much higher. So they go out on this run and they try and up it so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Their stomach is going to be like, no, no, we can't do this.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, well, I could never consume that amount. I've tried it once and it didn't work. Well, you have to really gradually, it's a progressive process to work your way up to that number. And that's why using your training as practice and consistently fueling during your runs, not going for a 2-hour run on a Saturday and not taking any fuel or fluids or electrolytes. You know, you have to be consistent and do your homework so that when you get to race day, because that's another thing, you see some athletes that don't fuel at all during training, and then they go to their race and they're loaded full in their vest with all sorts of fuels, and then their stomach goes south, you know, halfway through the race. So that's something too. It's like you have to practice it consistently. So then you get to race day and there's nothing new. Your stomach and your body is like, this is just another run and we're doing what we usually do, and everything's going to sit really well for you.
Nice. Well, when you did your first, when you did that Ironman, what did you, just curious, what kind of fueling did you do?
Yeah. So back then, there wasn't as many products as are available now, which, I love all of the fuel products that are out nowadays. Like I just nerd out on all of them. I have like a whole bin in my office of just sports fuel, and like, because we are always trying and reviewing stuff.
Yeah.
So back then, Honey Stinger was still pretty new, but I really liked their energy chews a lot. I preferred those over like the Shot Blocks or the Cliff Blocks because they just went down, like it felt like a workout to like chew through those like Shot Blocks. So the Honey Stinger chews were a favorite, and the waffles. And then I liked having something in a bottle, but at that point there really wasn't hydration mixes. They weren't super popular. Like Heed was one, and that tasted terrible to me. So like I could use a little bit of Gatorade in my bottle, I think, back then. But nowadays when I'm running or on the bike, and I need, or like if I'm out on the trail, I like Scratch Labs or like a Tailwind or something like that. Those are usually my two go-tos, but there's so many options now that I really like having a hydration mix in my bottle and then supplementing with gels or chews, or if I need something salty. Another one of my favorite things to do is soft boiled potatoes. So I'll boil, take like some like baby Yukon Gold potatoes, and I'll boil them in like really salty water and then just let them like cool on the counter, and then I'll take those out and just eat them. There's no wrapper. They're like, for people that need gluten-free, they're naturally gluten-free. There's you know, I tried to get as much salt in it as possible, plus it's got some potassium. Like it's just a nice like steady carb source to go with like the sugary stuff too, so you get a little different flavor profile. So those were like my go-to things back in the day, but now that we have more products, I like a good hydration mix too, because then you get a good dose of salt in there.
Yeah. And like Scratch has that super fuel now. That's, you know,
the high carb one. We're a big fan of that.
Yeah, it's because you can get, you know, in a 500 milliliter bottle, get, you know, 400 calories to sip on, you know, while you're, it's crazy.
Yes. Or like Morton makes their 320 mix. That's a good one too. That one just doesn't have enough salt in it.
Okay.
Whereas the Scratch one will have higher salt content.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, telling a lot of like the athletes I coach, like be looking at that. And, do you advise people to do like a sweat test or anything like that? It's like,
Yeah, we do have our athletes do quite a bit of sweat testing, just to get an idea of what their sweat rate is, like how much fluids they're losing, so that
yeah,
we can make sure they're staying, safe, especially during the summer months in their
yeah,
training. And we can practice uh, taking in that volume of fluids that they need, like hour after hour in their workouts. So
yeah,
again, they go to race day and you're like, oh, I need to drink all this water, stay hydrated, but your body's not used to it. And then you like feel kind of uncomfortable with that sloshiness.
yep,
Whereas if you've, again, adapted your body to tolerating that, nothing feels weird on race day. So
yeah,
we'll get a good idea of a sweat rate, just doing a simple like weigh in before, weigh in after, measuring, like drinking a measured amount of fluids during your
mhm,
workouts. So then we can calculate what your sweat loss is. If we're suspecting they're a really salty sweater and they're having some struggles with cramping and that type of thing, then we might have them do like I don't know if it's called Levelin or Levelin. It's like a patch
mhm,
that
yeah,
they put on themselves, and then they work out, and then they send that in, and it gives us a whole rundown of the electrolytes lost, and then we get a really good idea of what we need to be doing with electrolytes, because we can get kind of close, just in estimating, with their fluid losses
mhm.
and what's the typical, sweat loss, electrolyte loss range. But if they're a really heavy salty sweater, then we're like, yeah, let's get this dialed in. Cause I think the highest we've seen, I had one that was 2,200 milligrams of sodium an hour they were losing. And this was like a very petite woman. And then
Oh, wow.
we had one male cyclist last year that was working with Hannah. He was losing 3,500 milligrams of sodium an hour, like just
Oh,
massive amounts. So, I mean, it was a huge challenge for us to try and find ways to like preload him with salt, and then every hour trying to get in somewhere close to that so that he wasn't
yeah.
um, having issues, towards the end of his longer rides.
It's pouring salt in his, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
like
crazy.
it is wild, is wild. So, yeah, those are the types of things we nerd out on, and
Yeah.
we just, it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to find that, cause there's a lot of similarities, and there's, in most cases, there's not a lot of variability, like in sweat content, but there are the extremes that, like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's,
Yeah, I mean, there's some people that just release a lot. They release a lot of salt in their sweat, and then there's other people that they're very, normal or minimal salty sweaters. So, yeah, it's funny how everyone's different. So we really try to treat everyone as their own individual,
yeah.
and personalize that advice to them.
Yeah. Well, we have all these mixes and these different products that we can use, and they're super helpful. And so I I like the technology. I like, the advance in all these things, but I
Mm-hmm.
also like to try to do things as natural as possible. And so
Yeah.
I'm the guy that's a lot of times I'm mixing up different juices, figuring out how many calories are in them, and I have this weird concoction right here. And I was like, I'm gonna go run with this and see how it works, And
Yeah.
it's cherry juice, apple juice, just a few other things in it, and so I like that. And in October I did the Moab 240, and so I would have been one of those ultra runners because I was eating a cheeseburger or two and at every aid
Mm-hmm.
station, and just chowing down then, and then I would have Morton gels and some other things between the aid stations. And so it was, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I like to, I mean, for especially ultra runners, I like there to be a balance of both some real food
mhm,
with some sports fuel, right? Because if
yeah,
you're going to do all real food, that just gets really bulky and it's hard
mhm,
to carry all that on you.
yeah,
And it also depends on the race too, like how supported is it, with
yeah,
the aid stations versus like a fully self-supported race too. So there's some variability there as well. So you have to be,
yeah,
there's some strategy when it comes to
yeah,
those ultra
yeah,
races. And so yeah, I like doing both real food and some sports fuel, because with the real food you're getting like different flavors, different textures, and when you're out there for hours and hours on end, like you can only do so many gels or like drink so much Tailwind before you're like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so like having like even a cup of noodles, like salty,
Mm-hmm.
like savory goodness right
Love that.
there,
That's
you know?
so good
Yeah.
at night when it's
It's
cold.
so good at night to just
Yeah,
like have that like warm comforting. It's like a morale booster, you
it
know?
is.
Or like being strategic with caffeine too can be really helpful. You know,
Yeah.
like those are like, and are you going to get just like drink some coffee, or are you going to do like a caffeinated gel? Like just thinking through like what's going to be the best option for you.
Mm-hmm.
And, or like, even if it's like some Coke, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a Coca-Cola, like
Yep.
that stuff is like go-go juice right there for
Yes.
you in the middle of the night, to get you through. So, yeah, I like doing a blend of both some real food and sports fuel. Because then it just, that flavor fatigue is less likely to rear its ugly head, you know, in those later hours of the race.
Yeah. Our listeners are probably tired of hearing me say it, but I was a big fan of Tailwind. And I did the Tahoe 200 where that was kind of my base nutrition. And by the middle end of it, I could not drink Tailwind anymore. And
Yeah,
and it was a long time before I could do it again a little bit, you know. It just I just couldn't, you know, super
Yeah.
palate fatigue.
Yeah, and they do make like they call it their naked flavor. It's like an unflavored one. And I have some
Mhm.
people who are just really picky about flavors where I'm like, let's just do this. And then,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, or I've seen some people mix in like maple syrup into their bottle. You know, you said you'd add like juice or like that type of stuff, make your own little mix. Like
Yeah.
even, and then sprinkling some salt in there too, just to get some sodium.
Yeah.
Like you can make your own concoction of stuff. It just, when you're out on the race course, you're not going to want to be taking the time to like mix anything up,
Right.
or like, you know,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So the powdered mix does work pretty clutch in those situations.
Pretty convenient. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maple syrup was the other thing I added in my in that juice mix.
Yes.
Yeah. It's great stuff. Well, so you mentioned caffeine. That's you know, some people try to race without it. Do you have your runners try to, because I'm drinking coffee right now. I drink a lot of coffee in the mornings, but 2 weeks out from a race, I'll try to back off on the caffeine, so that when I take it, I will, you know, I'm tapering anyway. And so I back off on the caffeine so that it'll have more of an effect when I get into the nighttime hours and I drink a Coke or a Starbucks Frappuccino, because that's another rocket fuel, and with the sugar and the caffeine. But, so do you advise that? Is that
So from what the research shows, and because they've done a lot of research on caffeine as a, you know, performance aid for endurance athletes, and so they haven't really found that to necessarily be a benefit to like taper before a race. But if you feel like it helps and you get that little extra buzz because you haven't had caffeine a week, then I say go for it. And that's the thing, like if you're a habitual, you know, caffeine drinker or whatever you take it, like your gut's going to be pretty well trained to take it. But like caffeine can be kind of acidic. So if you're someone that doesn't usually do a lot of caffeine and then you're going to do a lot during your race, I would maybe practice quite a bit with it in your training so that, again, it's not going to cause any like bad side effects when you're, especially like if you're going to do like a Morton caffeinated gel, like that's 100 milligrams of caffeine. Like that's a really heavy dose, versus like you could find other products that might have a little bit lower content, might be better for your stomach too. And then I saw even with cis beta fuel, they have like a nootropics gel, and that one has 200 milligrams of caffeine.
Oh, wow.
Like, that is a lot of caffeine for a gel. And I would imagine it probably has a little bit of a bitter taste to it. So that, again, just something you want to trial in advance. So that you're not out on the race course and obviously like, whoa, this is not going so well.
Yeah. Nothing new on race day is, you know, we forget that though.
Yeah, it's a little different with an ultra runner because you do get to a point where your gut is just handles pretty much anything. Like a lot of ultra runners, in my experience, have a pretty iron gut. So you kind of get to the point where you're out on the race course and whatever they have at the aid stations that sounds good is what you go for. And I'm, for the most part, I get that. Like that. but as long as it's not something too wild, like I said, if you don't ever have caffeine and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch during a race, then that could be not great. But yeah, with caffeine too, I think being strategic, like you don't want to be taking large quantities throughout your whole long distance race, because you, at some point, that could be really hard on the stomach. And also there is research that after a certain point, it doesn't really offer any like additional performance benefit. Right. So you want to be a little bit more strategic, and like, yeah, you might have like your pre-race coffee that you always have in the morning, but then maybe save that caffeine for the nighttime hours when you're starting to get, where you need to be a little bit more on point sharp cognitively. So saving it for then and being a little more strategic.
Yeah. Gotcha. So, as we're, kind of looking at the different things that you encounter with athletes, and, I have a kind of a list of things here. We've talked about some of them, but when an athlete comes to you and says, Alex, I need help. I'm training for this race. Kind of maybe explain to me what the process is. What do you do to start figuring out, who this person is, what they've done before, and what's going to work for them?
Yeah. So, the first thing that I always ask is like, what are your goals? What do you want us to help you achieve? Because, and then I also ask like, what would you envision success for you later on the year? Tell me, what would success look like for you? They might have body composition goals, which is totally fine. But we want to know like, what is that goal? Right. They might have races coming up, and so we might need to be realistic about the goals. It's like, yeah, okay, you want to lose 15 pounds, but your major race here is in 4 months. Like, probably not going to be very beneficial for us to focus on losing that weight during this time. Let's focus on fueling for performance. We might see some body composition improvements just as a byproduct. And then after that A race, then we can hone in on seeing that body composition change there. So I really like to hone in on what their priorities and goals are first, and then helping kind of design a roadmap for nutrition to help them get there. So they come into the program. We use an online coaching platform, and the first thing we have them do is we have them take a food diary for a week. We do use some food journaling as an important part of our process, but it's not because they're ever going to feel like they're on a diet. It's more along the lines of a learning tool. So as they make their food choices, make some changes in their eating habits and food behaviors, they'll journal that, and they'll see how that translates to the nutrition changes that they're making for their body. And then that ultimately translates to how their performances are feeling in their training, how their daily energy levels are, how their hunger starts to get more regulated, how their body composition might start changing. And so it helps connect the dots. That's part of the process of like using a food journal. And eventually over time, we want to wean them off the journal, because the goal is to get them to graduate feeling very confident in making their food choices, have a lot of clarity in how to fuel their body for their training and adjust as needed without having to journal for the rest of their life. So that's our end goal, right?
Yeah.
And so coming in, we get a baseline food journal, and then that allows us to look at their goals, look at how they're fueling, calculate where we would want their nutrition needs to be, and start looking for gaps. Gotcha. And so going into that first call with them, we can talk through, okay, this is what we're seeing. This is where we're gradually going to work you to, but we got to do this in a way that works for your lifestyle, works for your schedule, works for your food preferences. Like I had a cyclist that came in the other day, and he was like, I don't like any fruits and vegetables. I'm like, none? He's like, I've never liked fruit in my entire life. And he's like, there's like 5 vegetables I like. I'm like, okay, all right, let's
focus on those.
You know what I mean? Like we can work with that, I'm like, can you do like fruit in like a smoothie? He's like, yeah, that's okay. I'm like, all right, okay. Like, that was just kind of like, that was interesting to me. So, everyone's like food preferences are a little different. If you have like an allergy, or maybe you eat vegetarian, plant-based, like we want to respect all of that, but that's part of the puzzle for us. And so, making kind of a to-do list of things that we want to work on with them, but we're not going to work on them all at the same time. We're going to start with the low-hanging fruit. What are some of the simplest, easiest changes we can start focusing on, and then gradually, progressively, step by step, getting them to where we need them to be nutritionally, so it's never overwhelming and complicated. So For some athletes, the biggest area that they need work on is their um, fueling around their training and workouts, and then ultimately putting together a race day strategy because they have a big, maybe PR goal, or they want to qualify for some big race. And so that might be the first priority. And then just focusing on kind of that day-to-day nutrition as supporting their recovery. Or maybe they have a pretty good base in terms of fueling around workouts, but the rest of the day is just a disaster for them and they have no clue how to eat. And so we're going to look at that day-to-day nutrition and start optimizing that and just chipping away and finding that kind of sweet spot for them with their schedule so that they feel good day in and day out. So that's kind of our strategy of really personalizing it to them, and getting them to that point where they're ready to graduate and being able to maintain things on their own.
Do you find that most of the runners that you guys work with are runners or endurance athletes, that their major problems are more their day-to-day or during their race times, their race fueling?
I would say well, sometimes both, to be honest. But that day-to-day is really a challenge, because like I said, my favorite people are the ones that work full-time jobs, they're parents, they're training a lot, and sometimes they just don't make eating a priority for them. And so by the end of the day, they're starving. So they find once they're home and the kids are in bed, they're their appetite just is raging and they're eating, everything that they can get their hands on in their kitchen. And and then they're going to bed so overly full, and it's just this vicious cycle. And then they might see the scale go up and they start restricting, and then they're fighting this willpower. So I hear a lot of very similar things from athletes. And I get it's just kind of goofy, but when I have those first initial calls with them and they tell me what the problems are, I get almost a little giddy because I'm oh my gosh, you're going to feel so great in just a few weeks once we get a hold of you and can get some of this stuff worked out. Because my favorite part is when they come back and they're I feel so much better. They're I have better energy during the day. I'm not a zombie or feel like garbage after my long runs. That to me is my favorite thing to hear back from them, because they're putting in this work to change their eating habits. They're being very intentional and they're starting to see the reward. And that's just truly the best part of my job. So, we tend to see pretty similar things, but that day-to-day nutrition is pretty important. And I view it as recovery nutrition because especially with ultra runners, you guys run a lot. You run most days of the week. You're running long distances. You're putting in a lot of miles. So any time that you're not running and you're eating, that is an opportunity for you to recover from your run and prep yourself for the next run. Yeah. And so, that lunch you have, that dinner you have, those snacks you're having, all opportunities to support your body in recovering and getting ready for that next one. So you have to really hone in on that day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's cool that people come to you and they're focused on, a lot of times they're racing, and I want to fuel better and to be able to race, but they end up feeling better all the way around when they nail the nutrition, just better quality of life.
Yeah. To me, my favorite win is when they're I got done with my 16-mile run and I cleaned my bathroom. I did a little work. I played with my kids and did some yard work. I feel so productive and I still have energy. And I'm that is the best win compared to any other PR or podium that an athlete might see.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think, one of the things that, I feel better when I'm eating healthier whole foods, the good stuff, and not eating trash. After Moab 240, for weeks after, I was just hungry all the time, and I failed on eating the right things because I ate everything, and the weight went up, all of that, and I still stayed active, but I am still digging out of the effects of after a big race like that. So that being said, because I have friends that they race all the time. They're doing A
I
couple
know.
hundred.
I've had some ultra runners that like they don't have an off season because I was like, when are we going to work on body comp? You don't have an off season. Like they're
Yeah,
always in like shape for a 50K,
yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah,
just wild to me.
yeah. And you know, our a 50K this week, and then there's another 100 miler next week, and there are 200 milers in a month and stuff. And you know, and I've done some goofy stuff like that, and but so I. I got to remember the importance of that recovery, that full, you know,
Mm-hmm.
making sure. So like if just this, you know, I know this is a generalization, but you have, I have 100 miler next weekend, just
Yeah.
hypothetically. And I go in and I race, you know, what would you tell your client? Like, okay, here's what you need to focus on the after the race, the day after the race, the week after the race. What are your, you know, kind of a broad stroke? What are your focus should be?
Yeah. So, and that's the trouble about like big races like that. Like you put so much effort and work into them, and then afterwards, you know, you've been training a certain way for so many months. Like, what does life look like after the race? You know,
Yeah.
that's my first question, because like, do you have another race that you're still going to like continue training at a high volume, or are you
Yeah.
taking a break
Right.
and, you know, your training is going to decrease significantly? Because like when I finished Ironman Wisconsin in 2014, I remember like the couple weeks afterwards, I would like start plating my food and I'd be like, whoa, I actually don't need all of this. It's just for the past 9 months, I've been loading up my
Yeah.
plates. And so I had to be very like in thoughtful and mindful about what I was doing. And I was like, I could see how athletes would just gain significant amount of weight after their race because you're just so used to eating like at a high volume and a high
Yeah.
frequency. So my first question would be like, are we going into an off season? Do you have another race?
Mm.
So, but let me back up. You also need to make sure that you're putting in the prep work for your race. Like, are you doing a proper carb load? Because in my experience, when athletes do a really good carb load before a big, you know, 50K, like 100K, you know, 200, whatever it is. If you're
Yeah.
doing a really proper carb load, I find that athletes recover way better afterwards.
Mm.
We don't see as big of like a weight, you know, because your weight tends to go up after a race just from inflammation.
Yep. Yep.
And that stress.
Yep.
We find that carb load really helps with recovery afterwards and just not seeing as massive of a weight fluctuation. But yeah, you get done with your race. I mean, your first priorities are going to be hydration, replenishing electrolytes, and starting to reload those muscles and repairing, you know, muscles with some good quality protein. So
Yeah.
I think, and then too, your appetite's always a little funky those few days afterwards. Some
Yeah.
people are starving all the time, and some people
Yeah.
might not have an appetite at all because again, their body's going through kind of this stress response. And so if you don't really have an appetite, then I would say you're going to have to focus on more intentional eating than intuitive eating, where even though your body's not hungry, you know that, oh, it's been like 3-4 hours since I've ate. I'm going to have my next meal here. It's not going to be like a massive amount of foods, but I know I'm going to try and get some carbs in, some good quality protein, maybe some fruits and veggies to get some micronutrients in there. Maybe having some salmon for that omega-3s, which is really good for reducing inflammation. Like just being very intentional about good quality food and not letting yourself get overly hungry. And then as, you know, the days go on, like being mindful of your hunger. Is all of a sudden that hunger coming back with a vengeance? Okay, let's really hone in on protein, especially earlier on in the day, because that can help regulate hunger. Staying up on the hydration, just that consistent supply of nutrition throughout the day and day after day can be really helpful to supporting the body and recovering and bouncing back quickly. So if you're going into another race, you want to recover as fast as possible so you can get back into training and prepping for the next race. If you're going into an off season, that's where we're going to need to adjust. Probably carb intake doesn't need to be as significant as when you were in that high volume training. So cutting back on carbohydrates, back to just like eating like a normal human. And then looking at, you know, portion size, you can just cut down on portion size, but still having those balanced meals. Maybe you don't need to snack as frequently. And just kind of looking at those types of things to getting you kind of back down to more of a normal human diet, I guess
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
how I look at it, versus the ultra endurance athlete diet.
Yeah. Yeah. There may be a post out there on the internet of my wife and I post one of 100 milers I did, waking up at like really early in the morning and walking to the Waffle House at our hotel. And I think I said I was spending our life savings. So I was like, I was just eating all the things.
I know they say running's an inexpensive sport, and I was like, I don't know if you've seen our grocery bills and our sports fuel bills, but they're not. And then all the running shoes you go through, like, it's not that cheap.
Yeah, you can dish out some cash. I won't pan the camera to show my my shoes right here on the shelf, but anyway, there's quite a few. So you talked about carb loading and to prepare for a race. So let's talk a little bit about metabolic efficiency, and because especially in the ultra running world, there's a lot of talk about, we have certain athletes who I did kind of keto fat adapted for years way back when, and I did pretty well with it. Now during a race, I would fuel with tailwind and all the things, but more of what I was eating before that was pretty keto. I call it keto paleo, just natural foods and but there are some that, I mean, they're really hardcore, some that are almost like carnivore and that are running like that for the most part. But so give me like the balance in that. So if I'm just a regular athlete who does carb loading and all, how do I get my body for these long periods of time to also burn fat besides glucose?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not like, and those that follow me on social, like they'll know that I kind of make fun of like the keto fanatics. But and like, because the research shows that it's the fat adaptation and the keto style diet for endurance athletes, it's not superior to fueling with carbs, all the time. I do find, I will say, like, if you're going to do, fat adaptation and like keto style diet as an ultra runner, that's probably the sport that it's going to benefit you the most, because you're not going to be, sprinting to the end. Typically your pace is pretty consistent. You're at a lower zone effort. And so that's where that fat adaptation style of fueling does tend to work a little bit better. If you're someone that maybe is like more of a sprinter, like shorter distance, like marathoner, where you're going to want to like finish really strong and try and PR for like Boston. Yeah. You're not going to have any like energy available to sprint to the finish, because you are going to be in that more anaerobic state. You're going to be using glucose as fuel, and there's not going to be anything really there to have that strong kick. So I will say, for the ultra running community, I can see where that is more of a trend. Mm-hmm. However, there are some other things, like I'm like a very logical like mind naturally. And so like eating the keto style is not always super easy, especially if you work full time in a job that travels and, you're going to conferences and social events, and it's like really hard to eat that style. Or if you have kids at home, like not the most challenging to try and cook yourself a separate meal. Right. So like those logistics are really difficult. Plus there's also like the heart health aspect of it. If you've got, a strong history of like heart attack and stroke in your family, and like that really high fat, high meat protein diet does not really go well with like heart health too. So like there's a lot of different aspects where I look at it, for like collectively, in the human population alone, I'm just like, I could see where carbs would definitely be the easier route to go. So yeah, I mean, if people want to do the metabolic adaptation route, don't come to me. That's good. But I'm not going to say but I'm not going to say like it's the worst thing in the world for you to do as an ultra runner, because like that style of training and racing would actually like work well with that.
Yeah.
But like as far as carb loading goes, you're looking at consuming a very high volume of carbs, low in protein, definitely low in fat, in those days leading up to your race to really
Yeah.
load up those glycogen levels in your muscles. Like that's the purpose of carb loading. Because when we have fully loaded glycogen levels, like we do have a lot of like energy available to go at your ideal pace and maintain that pace for longer without fatiguing. And so
Right.
loading up those glycogen levels and then fueling adequately during your race to help spare that glycogen helps you just keep that really nice consistent energy supply long term throughout your race. And there was a study done, I think it was in Norway, where they found that even like partially depleted muscles, they started to see performance decrease in that. Like they didn't even have to be fully depleted, that even just partially, people were starting to see their performance decline. And so as being able to spare that glycogen as much as possible really allows you to perform well consistently start to finish.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And so I think over the course of my life and my eating and training and all the racing that I've done, I think I've been either keto or not. I've been faltered on the side of more often than not on underfueling, like in my regular life, because I'm also trying to maintain the physique or or whatever. And that's hard. Do you find that trend? Like you have a lot of, when you look at what athletes are eating, that a lot of them are just aren't eating enough to fuel what they're trying to do?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time they're underfueling. I just had an athlete that started with me recently. He's a triathlete, and he's like, I'm so hungry all the time. He goes, and I just feel like crap. He goes, I'm like borderline lethargic. And I'm like, I'm not surprised because I just reviewed all your stuff and you're about 700 calories short of your maintenance every single day. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, he's like, he'd been working on protein, which looked great. I'm like, your protein looks great. I was like, you're not getting enough carbs. Like, I need to like double your carbs. So we need to start like working on that. And he's like, okay, yeah, I just haven't been able to give myself permission to eat more carbs. I'm like, you have permission from me. Like, please, let's
here it is. Do it.
Have a bagel. Have an English muffin, something like, let's get some more carbs in you. Like add some rice to this meal here where it's just the salad and salmon. And I'm like, you need to have some carbs because you are underfueled significantly. Or we see, some athletes where they're pretty close to what they need calorie wise, but they're just not getting enough protein. And that's where that hunger is kind of unregulated. They're not recovering really well. They're not seeing like their performance improve. They're just kind of been plateaued in performance. It's like, let's optimize that recovery with getting plenty of protein so that your muscles have something to work with to repair and rebuild.
Yeah.
So I definitely see a lot of underfueling going on because when you surround yourself with other adults that eat like normal and you are sitting there eating like twice to 3 times the volume, like you get a little self-conscious, or people like love to make comments like, whoa, are you hungry? Like, and so you have to just be comfortable being like, I train a lot, I run a lot, I need this as fuel. Because not all of us hang out with our entire our family and friends are ultra runners. That'd be a little different where massive grocery bills all the time. But
everybody's picking out.
So you have to kind of understand like, no, I need this fuel, or I need to eat more frequently to just get in enough to eat.
Well, I think it's an important concept, food as fuel. Think of it as that way. Like I have this run coming up, a Saturday long run coming up. So what am I doing Friday, Friday morning? What am I eating Friday to get me ready for even that long run, to prepare myself for it, and thinking of that. And then afterwards, do the long run, fuel during it. And afterwards, okay, like you said, I need to replenish what I just spent and get myself ready for another long run tomorrow,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you want to eat healthy, you want to eat like those whole foods, but if you're going to eat like a very clean whole food diet, like you're likely not going to get enough calories in because it's so you have to get, I mean, I can think of one athlete in particular, like I calculate his needs at like 3,200 calories a day. I'm like, if you're gonna do all clean whole foods, like you can't fit all that in a day. You know what I mean? You're gonna have to eat all night long to try and get, and that's so much especially with,
I was gonna say,
like,
fiber.
so much fiber. And so when they're like, oh, I'm really suffering from bloating and gas issues, I'm like, yeah, it's because you're eating like 80 grams of fiber a day and you only need 35. So I mean, that's where it's like, okay, we have to put in some more processed foods.
You got to eat some trash.
Yeah, like we have to have that balance in there. Like, let's have a Pop-Tart and like
that's great
to get some more calories in without all of that fiber. So like that's where and then you're not feeling like you have to eat perfectly all the time too, when you're like, oh, I have to eat clean in order to be healthy. I'm like, no, we got to find a balance. We got to get the veggies in there, got to get some good nutrition, but we also got to just get in more of the good, like the fuel, so that you feel good day in and day out. And you mentioned about like wanting to look, lean and strong. There's something about when I take an underfueled athlete and start optimizing their nutrition and they start eating more, that a lot of times we see them actually lose some weight.
Yeah.
And that's
crazy.
really kind of fun, where they're like, I'm eating more than ever and the scale is going down. What is this voodoo magic that you're doing? And I'm like, well, this is what happens when you're starting to optimize that metabolism more. Like your body is less stressed. You're not, having that binge restriction, like vicious cycle that we see a lot of athletes go through. And so, like one of my ultra runners I had a few years ago, he was probably eating around 1,900 to 2,000 calories a day. And I calculated his needs about 1,000 more than that. And so I'm like, we're going to gradually work your way up to eating, 28, 29, 3,000 calories a day. And as he gradually got there, he lost I think within 2 months, about 12 pounds.
Wow.
Just eating 1,000 calories more a day at that point. And he would do he did a workout when we first started, and then he did the same exact workout, and it was like a timed workout. So he ended up going like another 1.5 miles in that same.
Wow. Yeah.
And his heart rate was exactly the same. He's like, I'm just so much faster now. I'm like, yes, because your body actually has something to work with now.
It's crazy.
And it wasn't necessarily the weight off of him. It was just the fact that he was fueled so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that and that's a huge thing. It seems so counterintuitive, when you first look at it, but your body is hoarding fat because you're starving it, it's trying to,
that stress hormone.
Yeah. You got cortisol flying everywhere and you.
Exactly. And that's what's really interesting to me, because we've been pounded into our brains, like exercise more, eat less, and you'll lose weight. And that doesn't always work with the endurance athlete lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, you talked about protein earlier, and I think it was on one of your Instagram posts. I think that's one of the things as an older athlete, I'll be 50 this year. Protein is that one of the things that we need to maximize, and are there any others that we need to really focus on?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the Masters athlete posts that I had published, where I talked about, by the way, I Googled what the definition of a Masters athlete was, and it was like 35 and up, and
that's crazy.
Like, what? As someone who's almost 37, I was like, I'm already a Masters athlete? So
welcome.
I was very depressed.
She's offended over there.
I was like 35 and up. What?
That's crazy.
I feel like 35 is a prime age for like an endurance athlete. That's where a lot of like runners and triathletes, especially like the female athletes, at least, they're like at their peak of performance. Like it's a really competitive age group. So, so when you're in like those late 40s, early 50s, and even beyond, as we age, we tend to gradually lose some muscle mass. So there's a couple things that I think are really important. One is making sure you're strength training. And even at 35, when you to become a Masters athlete, you should be doing some sort of strength training to just preserve, if not build, some more lean muscle, because that is really going to help you stay, agile, staying strong in your sport as we get older. And with that, if you can combine it with a good, adequate, consistent supply of protein throughout your day and consistently, throughout your weeks, that really helps optimize maintaining, if not building more muscle, lean muscle on you. And because muscle does require more calories to maintain than it does to maintain fat. And so it does help keep your metabolism up nice and high too. So if you think about as we age and gradually lose muscle mass, and we're not optimizing that, and our metabolism goes down lower, but we're still eating the same, that's where we start to see people like, oh, I'm starting to see like this weight come on just gradually over the years. The next thing you know, they have, their midsection isn't as lean as they wanted it to be. And so if you can focus on protein to really help with that lean muscle mass, I find that can be very beneficial for as we age. And as we age too, we're finding that our body doesn't use it doesn't absorb that protein and use it as efficiently as it does when we're younger. So you might actually need to be consuming a little bit more protein than recommended, just so that you can get all of that in.
Do you and I've heard it both ways, but I heard it's important to space it out, 30 grams of protein multiple times maybe throughout the day, because your body will just not absorb all of it.
Yeah, well, I think, we're starting to see actually some research come out that people were consuming like 50, 60 grams at a time, and they did find that there still was really good benefits from doing that. Yeah. But that's a lot to be consuming at once. And that's a lot on your gut too. So I feel like if you can have a breakfast where you're having 25 to 35 grams of protein in, that's awesome. Most people don't get that much at breakfast. And that's just a really good way to start out your morning, already kind of ahead of the game. And then same thing with lunch, 25 to 30 grams, 25 to 30 grams at dinner, like that. Then you're going to get a really decent amount throughout the day. And then you don't have to rely solely on snacks to try and get yourself there. Like that consistent supply is really nice, because your body's going to be continuously recovering after those runs, especially if you're like someone that runs in the morning. Then you can get that continuous supply of protein to help with recovery. And even if you're struggling maybe with some muscle soreness and you find you're not bouncing back from your workouts really well, you could do something like a protein shake in the evening before bed. And that really helps with recovery overnight too. That's a nice little hack that even some of pro athletes will do to just help with recovery.
No, that's I like that because I like something sweet before bed, so why not a protein shake?
Oh, I know. I know. I usually have mine in the morning just because it's chaos with getting the kids out of the house, and so if I can make a protein shake in 2 minutes and drink it on parent drop off in the morning. But the one I use, I really like Thorne's chocolate whey protein, and I mix it with ice and some milk, and it, honest to God, I'm not even exaggerating, it tastes like a Wendy's Frosty.
Oh, really?
I am not even exaggerating, because I had an athlete of mine who was like, that's a sneaky little trick that you just taught me. He goes, because it really does taste like a Frosty. I'm like, it's so good.
That's awesome. Because what I normally do, I get back from my long run, and then I'll like cook 3 eggs and then have a protein shake before I go to work. And that's kind of what I eat right after. And then I'll have some other things, throughout the morning and lunch. But I think I'm probably not getting enough protein, so that night shake would that'd be great.
Yeah. I'm a fan of the evening protein shake for athletes. If they're struggling with recovery, and if there's someone that works out in the morning, I would probably pair that protein shake with some carbs too, just to, again, start loading up those glycogen levels that you go into that morning run feeling really good.
Yeah, good deal. Well, Alex, so much good information. We could probably talk, and I'm sure people listening probably have 50 other questions that I haven't asked. But how do people get in touch with you? I tell you, your Instagram's great. I love the stuff you're putting out there. Your TikTok, and how do people find you?
Yeah, so it's at Alex Larson Nutrition on social channels, and then my website is at alexlarsonnutrition.com. Definitely head to our blog. We have really put a ton of work into it over the past year with lots of different content.
Nice.
Especially on supplements, if you have questions about that. I mean, we got in women's health, and so
I meant to ask you both of those things, so I'm gonna have to go read it now.
I know, you'll have to go and check it out. We've got some our blog is our goal, my team and I were really competitive. We're like, our goal is to have like the best endurance nutrition blog on the internet. And
That's
so
all. That's cool. I like it.
Slowly checking away at the blog to have lots of really good stuff on there.
Nice. Okay, I'm asking you a quick question before we close out. Who are the more hard-headed athletes that you have to coach and do nutrition on? Is it the guys or the girls, men or the women? You can do no comment. I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want people to get mad at you.
No, I don't. Okay, so this is going to be really funny, and I don't want to offend anyone, but like when we get, it depends on their profession. I will say our male attorneys, if I get an attorney, I'm like, ooh, I don't know about you. Like they just like struggle. Like they're really hard. They just don't like to take advice. I don't know. But I have my best friend's husband is an attorney, and I said, "Why are my worst clients attorneys?" He goes, "Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me." He goes, "We don't take advice well." And I was like, okay.
That's funny.
But, I mean, not all of our attorneys have had struggles, but it's a higher percentage than other professions.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's awesome. Well, I'll have all your contact information in the show notes. I thank you for jumping on the podcast. A lot of good information. You know, hey people, you know, you want to run the long distances, you gotta fuel right. So if you need some help with that,
tell me how far you want to go, and I will help you fuel for that.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, Alex. I know you got kids to go start chasing again.
Yes, I know. I gotta go check on the baby here. So,
okay.
Thank you, David.
All right. Take care.